Welcome to this explainer. Today we're unpacking a massive historical puzzle. How exactly did a small, rain-swept island off the northwest coast of Europe manage to build the largest empire in human history? Think about it. Back in 1600, Britain was, well, kind of just a second-rate power. It had a much smaller army than France and a navy that was totally outclassed by Spain. Yet, within just 300 years, they completely flipped the script. To really wrap our heads around the sheer, almost impossible scale of this achievement, consider that at its absolute peak in 1922, Britain controlled 24% of the Earth's entire land surface. That is nearly a quarter of the globe, literally stretching across every single inhabited continent.
And we're talking about governing 412 million people. This expansion utterly dwarfed the Romans, the Mongols, you name it. You know that famous phrase, the empire on which the sun never sets? Yeah, that wasn't just some poetic bragging. It was a literal geographic fact.
So here's our agenda for today. We'll look at 1. An island forged by invasion. 2. Mastering the global oceans. 3. The corporation that conquered. 4. The industrial engine of empire. 5. Its imperial peak and rapid collapse. And finally, 6. The legacy that remains.
All right, diving right into Section 1, an island forged by invasion. From conquered to conqueror.
It's actually wildly ironic, but before Britain could rule the world, it basically had to survive being everyone else's punching bag, right? Centuries of being repeatedly invaded actually forced the island to develop this incredible resilience. The Romans came in and left behind vital infrastructure. Then the Vikings proved the island was terrifyingly vulnerable from the water, which forced them to finally organize. And then the Normans showed up with a ruthlessly centralized administration. Basically, Britain learned the hard way from its conquerors that projecting power requires supreme organization.
Moving on to Section 2, mastering the global oceans. The sea as a highway.
Because they were an island, controlling the sea literally meant controlling their very survival. And the ultimate turning point here was a classic David and Goliath story, back in 1588. At the time, Spain was the absolute wealthiest empire on Earth, but their massive, lumbering armada failed catastrophically against England's much faster ships and longer-range cannons. That single victory completely shattered the myth of Spanish invincibility. From that moment on, for Britain, the sea wasn't just a defensive mode anymore. It became a global highway.
Fast forward a couple of centuries to 1805 at the Battle of Trafalgar, and we see Admiral Nelson's tactical genius perfectly cementing this dominance. Nelson's fleet of just 27 ships faced down a combined Franco-Spanish fleet of 33. By totally breaking traditional naval formation, Britain lost, get this, absolutely 0 ships, while the enemy lost 22. The victory was so completely decisive that no rival navy would even seriously challenge British control of the seas for well over 100 years.
Which brings us to Section 3. The corporation that conquered, the East India Company.
Now, with the oceans totally secured, global expansion was actually driven heavily by private enterprise, not just the king. Think of the joint stock company as basically the original venture capital startup. Instead of a monarch risking the entire royal treasury on one wildly dangerous voyage, private investors could step in, buy shares, pool their capital, and share the risk. It was a genius financial innovation because it funded these massive colonial ventures without bankrupting the state.
And the ultimate result of this was the East India Company, which somehow mutated from a humble little trading post in 1608 into a sprawling corporate government. The real turning point hit in 1757 at the Battle of Plassey, where they used outright military force to install a puppet ruler. By the 1850s, this single private corporation governed virtually the entire Indian subcontinent. I mean, just imagine a modern tech company today having its own standing army and collecting taxes across an entire continent. That was literally the East India Company.
Let's look at Section 4, the industrial engine of empire, the power of coal and steam.
Perhaps their most decisive advantage was a massive technological leap that just left the rest of the world entirely in the dust: the Industrial Revolution. From those early steam engines to the very first public railways, Britain was innovating at a staggering, unprecedented pace. What they did was create this massive feedback loop. Raw colonial materials were transformed into vast wealth, and that wealth funded even more rapid expansion. By 1850, with just 2% of the global population, Britain somehow accounted for roughly 20% of total global industrial output. Crazy, right?
And of course, this industrialization created a terrifying military asymmetry. Tiny British expeditionary forces could suddenly defeat massive indigenous armies, all thanks to new weapons like the Maxim gun, the world's first fully automatic machine gun. The entire situation is perfectly, if chillingly, summed up by the writer Hilaire Bellarc, who wrote, "Whatever happens, we have got the Maxim gun and they have not."
All right, Section 5. Imperial peak in rapid collapse. The sun never sets.
By 1922, especially following the massive territorial gains after World War I, all these puzzle pieces we've talked about, the geography, naval supremacy, and runaway industry, had fully compounded. Britain now governed nearly a quarter of all humanity. And this massive demographic scale is exactly what allowed them to mobilize millions and millions of soldiers from places like India, Canada, and Australia during the World Wars.
Yet ironically, those very world wars left Britain completely financially exhausted. So what took centuries to painstakingly build unraveled in mere decades. Starting with the monumental independence of India and Pakistan in 1947, a massive wave of decolonization swept across the globe. By the time Hong Kong was officially returned to China in 1997, Britain had gone from ruling 412 million people worldwide, right back to being a nation of 60 million sitting on an island.
This brings us to our final part, Section 6, the legacy that remains. Systems and scars.
To look impartially at this era, we absolutely have to recognize the massive, deeply embedded systems Britain left behind, systems that literally built the architecture of our modern world. Today, an incredible 1.5 billion people speak English. Parliamentary democracy and common law lay the core foundation for governments across North America, India, and large parts of Africa. Even the absolute bedrock of our global financial institutions and global railway networks still carry deep British DNA.
But we also have to look at the other side of that ledger, which carries profound systemic costs and deep historical wounds. We have to acknowledge the undeniable reality of the transatlantic slave trade, which transported millions of Africans in extreme brutality. There was massive economic extraction, like the estimated $45 trillion pulled directly out of India's economy. And the drawing of entirely artificial colonial borders suddenly grouped incompatible communities together, divisions that, as we know, still fuel deadly ongoing conflicts in Africa and the Middle East today.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a really complex question to chew on. Who actually paid the price for Britain's rise? The empire itself might be gone, but its world certainly is not. The borders, the languages, the financial architecture, and yes, the deep inequalities it created are still woven right into the very fabric of our present day. Ultimately, understanding the British Empire is really about understanding exactly how our modern reality was forged. Thanks so much for joining me today, and keep exploring.